Baie dankie en dankie vir al julle moeite en kos.
Hi, Billy.
Hey, hi, so here I am. Okay. They only opened up our discussion, our possibility to chat now. I mean, yeah, so I don't know if everyone else is there, but just a quick one. Would you do the opening welcome?
Sure.
And then I'll go into question 1 from the communication perspective, and then I'll offer you for you to go into question 2, and then to question 1, and then I'll go to question 2. Or how do you want to do it? Do I do all? I can do it all.
So I think I see. Before we do any questions, I'd like to go through my tips.
Okay. What about? Unless you might get stopped there. That's the only problem.
Yeah, I'll try and move through it quite quickly.
Okay, fine. Then why don't you do welcome your tips, and then I'll go question. The thing is that what I'm doing is I'm taking the framework that we use to mark to lead them to understand these are basically the principles that they need to apply. So it's incidental almost that it's November. This was last year's exam, but I used last year's exam to illustrate the principle. So that's basically what I've done.
I don't know.
So you can, okay, but what were you thinking you would, we had agreed that I would go, I was going to go first, but it doesn't have to be that way, but.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a general, I don't want to deal with the question,
yeah.
But I thought.
Okay, well, I'm very focused on the question, but I extrapolate from there to principle. So
what we'll do it like this: you go first.
Okay.
You deal with question 1.
Okay.
Which is a good one because it's a more of a communications focused. With the other one's got some more technical bits, and whatever, we'll be fine either way.
Okay, let's just play it by ear. So I'm open to do that. I have a presentation that I've got.
Yes.
And I don't have to. We don't have to stick to that. Who goes next story? It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, but I think I'll just do an intro and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Because when that'll be nice. Then you do those general points that you've got as well after me, and then I have some specifics on the letter, and I can come in after that, or with you on those points, because there are points that would definitely you would take into account as a technical market as well as ourselves.
Yeah. So I think deal with question 1, and then let me do my bit, and then I'll go into question 2.
Okay.
And then you come in back to question, and then you come back with your points on question 2.
Okay, cool. That sounds good. Great stuff.
Yeah, okay. I think that will be.
Met these people.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well. People
can
start dialing in.
And then, so when you're okay with it being recorded, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
What do I want to ask you? Any particular way you'd like me to introduce you?
I've been marking since 2012, I think. Yeah. So that's and then I started teaching the course since 2015. Rather passionate about communication, but also transformation as well. So that's basically me, for the moment anyway.
Billy, Selwyn,
Hello.
it is Joe. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, and you, Joe? But we can't
Good,
see you.
good. I'm so sorry. Let me just quickly. I've actually given host rights to Billy.
Okay.
So you're in complete
okay.
control. So you can mute and unmute everybody. Sorry, I was
Okay.
actually just getting my little girl out of day hospital. So that is
Oh,
why
shame.
Oh, shame.
it was a bit
Sorry.
Everything's
struggle.
okay.
But I'm in the car now, but I've muted myself. I'm going to mute myself again now. And then as soon as everybody's in, I'll have a look at the participants. At the moment, it's just us. So as soon as everybody's in, then I will leave. Billy, and you can just run the show.
Thank you
Okay,
so
great.
much.
Thank you. Thanks very
Perfect.
much.
And I've already been recording, so we will just snip the recording for distribution purposes.
Oh, lovely. I'm glad about that.
Great. Perfect. Thanks a lot, guys, and enjoy.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Well,
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
okay, I can then admit people who are waiting. There. Hi, everybody. Not everybody yet here.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
We're just going to wait for people to log in. So you're with us.
We are expecting about 18 to 20 people, Selwyn. So
Great.
I think maybe a few minutes would help. I wonder if there is load shedding somewhere. Oh, there are two.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Let's give it a few minutes.
Okay.
Billy, I think I'm going to count down 2 minutes and then we can
Okay.
get going.
All right. That's great. Thank you. I'm just admitting people here. seems okay. Let me have it in the meeting.
Okay, Billy, is anyone else that we need to let in?
There are a few coming.
Okay, we'll wait.
Still. We're up to 12. Actually 13. Okay, I think we should go, and then I'll just admit as we go along.
Okay, good. Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Selwyn Kohlberg, and with me I have Billy Enderstein, and we are quite excited to be giving you a coaching session on how to pass the communications paper. I will tell you that I've never written a communications paper because I qualified so many years ago that the communications paper didn't exist in those days. But I have been marking the paper since 2012, and I work in the healthcare sector, and I can tell you the skills that you are expected to have to pass the communications paper are exactly what I use day in and day out. Billy's also been marking since 2012. But whilst I have a technical focus, she focuses on the communication side of the paper. There are 2 markers to every paper. And she's been teaching communication since 2015. She's passionate about communication and transformation, and the 2 go together so well. I see hopefully the same screen you do, and I'm not looking at live people other than Billy, so I'm just seeing names and no moving people. So perhaps you can switch your screens on for those of you who are comfortable, just for 30 seconds, just for the introduction, so that Billy and I feel like we're actually talking to people as opposed to
Icons.
stills. Yeah. Cameras on, yeah.
Hello, everybody. I think that Darren from Namibia can't put, for some reason, he doesn't have a video capacity. So.
Okay, good. Oh, wonderful. That's much better. I feel like I feel alive. So if any of you are comfortable keeping your cameras on, I'd be very grateful. It makes it's much more interactive for me. I can kind of see what's going on. All right. So in terms of how we're going to run today, the first is I'll just give a few introductory remarks. Billy will then run through question 1, which will be kind of an opportunity to deal with the question, but as well as it's more about communicating to you about the principles of how to answer questions from a communications point of view. I'll then come in and give you some of what I call my communications marker tips, what I think I've learnt marking papers over the last 8 or 9 years. And then we'll go into question 2, and then Billy will come back with some additional comments. As we go through, I think feel free to interrupt us, either using one of those reactions at the bottom of the screen, or just wave or shout or something, just to interrupt us as we go along. We might just say to you, look, we'll deal with that later, just to kind of keep the flow going, or ask your questions straight away. But I urge you, please, this is all about what you guys need. And please don't leave questions. Don't walk away from today with questions that you wish you could have asked. We'll be most disappointed if you do that. If I can just get an indication, first of all, and you can, I don't know, use the reactions or just put your hand up or something. How many of you have attempted the communications paper? Either at varsity or through ASSA. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 or 4. Okay, 5. Okay, roughly half. No, I can't tell. Okay, so some have. Okay, and if you can put your hands down, how many of you have actually attempted this 2020 paper? I think there was a request that asked you to actually have a go. How many of you have actually sat down and had a go at writing this paper? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 or 7, roughly half. Okay, good. All right. So any questions before we jump into it, or I hand over to Billy? Yeah. Billy, we're in your hands.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that warm welcome, Selwyn. That's great. What I wanted to do is just want to share my screen with you. And yeah, okay, let's do that. And where is it? Okay, so here we are today, and okay, there's someone in the lobby. I've just admitted them. As Selwyn said, we are going to, he has given you briefly the agenda. So we are going to go over the 2 questions, but actually our lens is about how you can apply the principles that we are actually looking for you to demonstrate in the exam questions, in the answers, and also general principles that might arise from experience of these exams. So we're going to dip into, okay, there were no comments from the November exam. Well, they always call it November when they put it onto the site, but it's actually always written in October. So I think it's because of the delay from the exam itself to it getting onto the site. Okay, so if we're going to look at the first question, right, you've all said, I'm hoping that you've all read the question, at least familiarized yourself with the question if you haven't actually attempted it. I'm sure more than half of you have actually done this question. Anyway, from a communication perspective, these 5 categories are the ones that we always deal with from the communication markers perspective. We look at the number and range of slides, and this is actually just the top, the umbrella of what we look for in the range. Okay, so the range per se needs to also be substantial. And what we mean by that is that your full spectrum of slides shows that you've actually dealt with some background, you've dealt with the questions that have been asked and your audience and so on in such a way, and also perhaps a summary. Sorry, is there a question? Oops. I can't hear you, but maybe if we can just, if you could put your hand up if you do need to. Did you have a question, anybody? Okay, so we have that, and we also have the slide headings. The communication markers want to see that your slide headings actually have some meaning, that they're actually they're pertinent to the slide itself, and that in fact they are mirroring the agenda. Okay, we're very particular about that. The presentation format in this exam is not necessarily the way you would present at a function at work or presentation for a pitch or something, because we do want you to follow certain guidelines and we mark accordingly. Structure and design, that is how this looks, okay, how your presentation looks, and the design would also point to the more intrinsic values of the slide itself. The language you use, are there phrases, are there full sentences, have you just copy and pasted, have you enhanced somewhat there, and also does it make sense what you've written, and is the grammar correct from the point of view of the spelling, apostrophes, etc. And then of course our overall impression. Does it hang together? Does it make sense? Is your audience constantly in mind? Do we feel as if we were the audience that you would have been addressing us all the way through? So what I've done is I've just actually implanted in this presentation, the presentation that was given as a sample solution. And we're going to just critique it, and I'm going to show you where these principles are reflected each time. So on the opening, you recall that you were told that you were given 3 slides, which was very generous, because even in those 3 slides, you got the agenda, which is like a framework. And so that wasn't the tricky part of this question. The tricky part was gathering the material and knowing how to put it in place. So here we have the opening slide. From the communication perspective, for an opening slide, we're looking for a good title and a subtitle, perhaps, that would provide context for the audience as well as context for the viewer, and also give the details of who you are as the presenter, and also the date. Note that the date is in full, 15th of August 2020 is written here. So always put your date in full on your title slide. We don't have to have a separate heading for that states it's for the actuarial students, because it's implicit in this ethics for actuarial students. And it is clear that this is the company giving it. When people changed this title slide, what they did was they unfortunately didn't take the subtle meaning that the presenter and the actuarial students were both at the same consulting company. So that on the communication side was a little bit of it wasn't perfect if you didn't get that detail right. So it's not actuarial students at university. It's students in the workplace, which you will be. You consider yourself a student until you qualify. Okay, so the agenda was very neat. Now, you could have enhanced this whole presentation by simply choosing a design template that gave you sufficient space and also gave you a bit of color. You wouldn't have been able to replicate this absolutely perfectly, and it would have taken you time to do so. So it would have been better for you to use a design template that gave you scope for space, and these icons are easily obtainable from PowerPoint itself. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got the recap right through to the questions. You don't always have to put the questions there. This time around, it's there and it's fine. Under honesty and integrity, you will see that there are 2 slides for honesty and integrity and 2 slides for implications for other parties. You needed 2 slides for each of those. But in other presentations, you might want to actually, in your agenda, state honesty, integrity, and maybe from the company's perspective and from the profession's perspective. But there was no space here. And it does work very well in the presentation, which we'll see in a moment. Okay. You can also, on the agenda slide, you could have called it an overview, or you could have, this one works for agenda because they're going to discuss these each in turn. There's going to be a discussion. It's a workshop that's going to happen. It's not just somebody transmitting information. You could have had overview or topics to be discussed as well. So we move into the recap of the first workshop, and I can't tell you how many people forgot to put this in. They didn't have a recap. It's because they changed the agenda and then forgot about providing the background. The recap would have given the background for this, and this was already given in the slides, which was interesting. Okay, so notice, notice how this is being displayed. They are actually quite long, the actual phrases, but there's no full stop, and it is also quite succinct with the 4 bullet points. It's pleasing, there's good layout, and so on. So that's what we look for on the design. This template affords a place for the eye to relax on the left with the title. And then on the right, of course, you have the real content. So that's what we're looking for in the design as well. Is there enough space for the reader, the viewer, the audience to take in both the main point as well as the subpoints? So I think this might have happened when I transferred the slides, but here we have a little bit of an awkward moment because of the spacing here. Honesty and integrity, there is the heading, and there is the subheading because it's the profession. If you didn't have that, then you would have had in brackets 1 to indicate that you had 2 slides dealing with this topic, okay, with this particular topic. Now notice, I want to show you throughout here, what we look for from the communication perspective is whether there is attention to parallel structure. Parallel structure is a technique. You will notice here, these bullet points are all in parallel. They are parallel structured because they all begin with a verb: uphold, act, be, uphold. And this last one is different, but we allow that because it is actually panning out to in relationship with clients, regulators, etc. So it's almost like a conclusion to that. So let's see if you can pick this up in the other slides as well. All right, here again, honesty and integrity, company. So that is then, of course, your second slide on this topic. So here, once again, can you see the parallel structure? Be open, deliver, act in good faith, be transparent. And then these core values demonstrate, build trust, and enhance. So instead of having to repeat each time and get yourself all tangled up with a long phrase, it's very economical to use it like this. These core values, for example, and then you actually fill them in with a verb leading. You can also have statements, but then they must all be statements. You mustn't have a mix of statements and verbs to start. Okay, so implications for other parties, for the profession. Now we see another parallel structure that is actually being played out. So you saw from the agenda slide, right, that we had, we had honesty and integrity, which fans out to 2 slides, and it deals first with the company and then with the profession. And then, first with the profession and then with the company, and the same sequence, implications for other parties, profession, and then the company. So this makes sense really for 2 reasons. The audience is able to follow you now because you've set up a way. You're expecting the profession to be first and then the company. It also makes sense from an ideological point of view because the profession is the broader banner. You are answerable to both the profession and the company. And your first instance is your allegiance to the profession as a professional, because you wouldn't actually be in the company if it wasn't for that, basically. Okay, so that's I'm following through there with that principle of the parallel structure again. And here we have uphold, professional promise, then inserted here, I didn't mention it previously, instead of having the bullet points exactly the same, they changed the color, which is nice, you know, because there's not a lot of color and not a lot of variation in these slides. It's very text-based. And then, of course, you've got your uphold and your draw attention. This really does help for recall. Okay, so this one again is a bit full. You couldn't really avoid it being full. It's not slide 11, by the way. It's just because I have numbered my slides. Numbering the slides are very important. It's very important to do that. Okay, so this could have been perhaps presented in some other way, but once again, it's a very, very strong parallel structure with the verb leading. Every single bullet point, besides these that break out, which we've now actually come to accept, they too are within themselves. There is a style, balancing and ensuring, so a different form of the verb, but the rest leading with the verb. So it was important, and it is important for you to remember when you do a presentation, is to have some form of graphic in there, whether it's a table or whether it's a graph, whatever it may be. Here they've chosen a table, and what they've done for the table is they've also created emphasis through the use of the font, right? The font, the bold, versus font that is not bold but italics, for example. So there you already have 3 variations on the way in which you can present something, okay? Now, a lot of you for this question on the Amazon-based recruitment, on the case study, a lot of candidates, I should say, transported the entire case study into a presentation. And if this being a workshop which is continuous, it's quite likely that the students would have had this to look at before. If not, it certainly wouldn't serve to put the whole case study on this slide. All right, it is actually you have to distill the main emphasis of the recruitment tool, as they've done here, model derived from past experience used to automate recruitment decision making, and then practice didn't consider the impact on other parties. Okay, so there that would give you enough of a background, and then you needed to show on professional guides, you need to state from the professional's point of view as well as from the company point of view what actually the case study dealt with, and had they dealt with it in the proper way, then this wouldn't have occurred. Interestingly, I just want to say is that people struggled to critique the case study. Fairness was a main issue, a main theme that came up. There were other sub-themes as well, but the examiner said to you, there's one main theme there. And so in all of it, I think fairness is presiding, but also you needed to indicate by way of your analysis where it wouldn't have faltered, and students did struggle with this critique. They did. Okay, so there's a conclusion. So here we've seen actually quite a wide range, of slides, because there's a conclusion as well. And if you're not given the chance, or maybe you have so much content that you are stuck with one slide, then make your conclusion and your thank you slide together, bring them together. Also, we have seen 2 slides here that they were struggling for space. And so you need to consider the template that you use. Maybe it was over generous to have a third of your screen on the heading, whereas it might be just a fifth as on a normal slide just at the top. These are sacrifices that you make, and you have to look at that carefully. So here again, we've got company. Ethics are very important to the company and the profession. So what they've done in the conclusion, now they've changed things around, whereas you had the parallel development with those specifics. Here we have it clustered differently because we now have the profession and the company together in the conclusion. But still, here is is parallel structure, guidance provided from the company. So this is your noun, and there is your ethics policy statement. The profession, again, a main noun, code of professional conduct, okay? Honesty and integrity and implications for other parties covered specifically. You will be expected to. Now, this is very important because the personal pronoun was missing in most of this presentation. And there's opportunity for you to get closer to your audience, get your audience engaged if you use the personal pronoun. So I'm very pleased that finally there it is. It was very much in the beginning and once I think in the beginning, but here at the end. So think of that. And once again, we have the parallel structure. Apply the guidance, avoid Amazon's misjudgment. Okay, so just, okay, let's go to the last slide, sorry. On your last slide, you do want to invite, it's a workshop scenario. You want to invite your audience to ask questions. You always want to say thank you and make sure that there is some sort of design involved in this last slide if you have the time. Of course, if you run out of time, it's a different story. And this is rather nice to use a little icon on the contact details for the email address and the telephone. Okay, so it wasn't the most attractive presentation, but it had everything in it. And also, it was still appealing. So you have to find a middle road there. You need to make sure that you can provide an attractive presentation, one that highlights meaning through the way in which you choose your words and your font size, your font bold or what have you, and also to have color, because color can really make a difference. And don't become too rainbow colored, but there are times when you could use it quite sensibly. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour of that. I just want to quickly go over that we've covered everything, your range of slides, and remember that we take off marks if you have too many or too few. And that also that they are numbered. Please number your slides because we just insist that they should be numbered. Right now we are in a workshop. We'll have some questions and then you might have taken down the slide number so that I could answer your question for that slide. And then of course your structure and your design. So your structure is, how does this whole piece hang together? Is there coherence? Does it move logically from the opening to the close? Is there some body that I can that the audience can hang on to, the content, etc. And of course, drawing it nicely to a close. And then your language, making sure that you don't have any grammar mistakes and so on. And so the bulk of the marks really reside in the structure and the design and the language and tone and the overall impression. But don't undermine the marks you can get from your headings, right? Your headings need to be applicable to each slide. The headings create that context for your viewer straight away, okay? And then, of course, they must be in sync with your agenda or topics to be discussed. So I would like to open up the floor if there are any questions, or Selwyn, if you'd like to give any comments, but maybe you'd like to reserve it for later, I'm not sure. Anyone have any questions here? Let me see. Yes, Lutando. We've got several questions. Okay, so would you like to unmute yourself then? We go first. I've got on my screen, I've got Danya at the top, but I've just asked Lutando could go. So Lutando, then Danya, and then Itumeleng.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I just have two questions. The first one was the continuation of slides. I kind of took a risk with that one because I knew that there was more information, but you know, the notes tell you don't do continuation of slides, and then in this kind of example, you find that the slide there is a continuation of slide sort of. So how do you actually now decide to say, am I going to do continuation slides? Am I not? And then
yes, good.
Yeah.
I'll have to. Can I answer that one quickly for everybody? You can hold your other question. So what I would do is, if there's clearly a lot of information with a particular topic. Now in here we did have 2 instances, so they were a little bit different. So it wasn't as if they were a continuation on the profession, didn't have 2 slides. The company didn't have 2 slides. So, and also we don't mind it. We'd prefer you to have it over 2 slides with the one in brackets or something like that, than you force it to fit on 1 slide. But usually you can find a differentiator within the content. So then you could actually have a different slide heading. So this is what the examiners are looking for. They're looking for your creativity to find a heading that would suit the content. So too often we cluster too much information under 1 heading, whereas it could actually be under 2. So apply that rule, that you're looking at this information and you ask yourself, well, how would I separate it? Is there a separation possible here? And then you might even have at least the same heading, but you might even have a subtitle to the heading, rather than the same heading and no subtitle and nothing in the brackets. Or, which is much worse, got all that content on 1 slide. Okay, so does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Great. Good.
And
you
then
had a second
the
question.
second one was the second one was with the case study. So
Yes.
when I attempted it, I think I struggled there a bit, because there was an issue where they said don't mention something about recruitment, and I actually didn't do it as a table. I did it as in point form, because I was not aware that we needed to do it as a table. But looking at the solutions, I think I got 50% of the stuff that I needed to get in for the case study. So then how do you also differentiate in that point to say, I'm going to use a table and this is the information that I'm going to put? Yeah.
Well, it was a difficult question in that respect. I found that most people did not put a table, but they still made it interesting. The design aspect came into the slide itself. So it didn't have to be, but if you think about it, if you're getting the same style for every slide, and now you want to highlight the critique, and it's the same style, you've got to make that slide look different somehow if you don't have a table. So you need to then apply your creativity in another way if you don't use the table. I'm saying it's useful to have a graphic of some sort, because it's another way of presenting the information for the audience, for your viewer. And if there's any form of comparison, it's usually quite helpful. Here there was a comparison of a type, because in the way this table was done, it created, the professional guidance on the one side and the policy statement on the other. So it created two sections, 2 categories. So that's where your mind should be going. Are there categories? Is there a way in which this can be compared, etc.? So there wasn't a comparison as such, but the 2 categories were there. And then what they did was how Amazon responded, and then what the guidance said. So there was that nuance. I admit this is a tricky part. And so you shouldn't just focus, I must have a table. You must first focus, is there a comparison? How will I be able to critique this? What information can be clustered together? So those are the questions you should ask. And if it happens to fall easily into a table, then that's great. Okay, so that's it. It's not, So then we had Danya. Thank you, Lutando. I'm just moving quickly because Selwa needs to get onto his section as well.
Thank you, Betty. So my question is with the title slide, the first slide.
Yeah.
So I just added something because I thought it would flow from the first workshop. So for instance, under the title on the right-hand side, the ethics for actuarial students, I had it in a smaller font, workshop 2, to allude that this is a continuation. So
Very
I don't know
nice.
if that was too much or if it wasn't necessary to do that.
So that's fine, as long as your total slide gave you sufficient space to do it. So
Okay.
remember that that would be fine. No one thing that you did, usually it's not one thing that you did that would have detracted. And remember, that was only on that slide. But yes, you could, to show that continuity. That's quite nice.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks. And
Okay.
then the second question I had was just with regards to the parallel development.
Yes.
So you mentioned, Billy, that the way parallel development works is that the structure will start, or each bullet point will start with a verb. But for instance, in my case, I know it is bad, but to write full sentences. So I said a member, for instance, a member must act with, or a member must uphold, a member should act. So I just wanted to understand if that is appropriate.
No, well, for this medium, no. For a document where it's a legal document and you need to be absolutely specific who it is that needs to uphold, then of course you would put that in each time. But here we want, remember, it's a visual medium and it's also spoken. So imagine the person presenting, then they'll be able to say, these are the things that the member needs to follow. And then they would tabulate them. So that would make it far too wordy, too many words on that slide. And also it's cluttered for the viewer. Now I need to go through each one, and then before I get to the point, rather put the point in straight away. Okay, so yeah. Selwyn, somebody want to say something?
On that one, thanks for the question. It's excellent. So when you do a PowerPoint, it's a balancing act between not having cluttered slides, where there's like no sort of white space, if I can call it that, versus having so little information that a reader will actually not be able to appreciate what you're trying to get across. When you're in the work environment, when you're designing a PowerPoint for work purposes, which you're not doing here, you're doing it for exam purposes, but I want to illustrate the point. When you're doing it for work purposes, you generally want to have as few words as possible in your slides, because it's always being delivered, as Billy pointed out. You're standing up in front of an audience with your slides behind you, and your slides are merely a guide to what you're actually saying. What you want when you're doing a PowerPoint is people to actually listen to you and just use the slides as a visual kind of aid. Where here in your exams, it's actually flipped the other way around. The test you must always ask yourself is, if somebody else reads the slide and can't hear what I'm saying, because you're not, when we mark, we don't have the benefit of you standing in front of us. Ask yourself on every line, if somebody else reads this, will they be able to make sense of the words that I've written? And that should help you kind of get that balance of too short, or 2 words, who's going to be able to make sense of this, or maybe 2 words is enough, versus a long sentence which feels like you're actually just writing a letter. Then you've gone too far to the other extreme.
Great, thank you,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dania. Has that helped you, right? Okay, good. So Itumeleng, you had a question. Has it been answered with all these other questions or not?
Yes, hi. Yes, so some of them have been answered. I just have one question though, with regards to like the subheadings in the slide. So
Right.
is it advisable to use questions like subheadings in a question format when you're like for each slide, or like for the bullet points even, and then kind of like speak to that?
So Itumeleng, that's great. A lovely question, because questions didn't come up here, a format as a style of engaging with the audience. It's great because it always a question always gets your audience to think. Stylistically, from the presentation, from the communication perspective, if your headings, if you have one heading that's a question, they must all be questions. We don't, we will mark you down if you have a mixture of questions and statements as slide headings. Within the question, within the slide itself, it would be quite nice to have several questions. If you can cluster the questions together, there too, we will see that there would be some sort of, there might be a development with the question. Maybe each main bullet point is a question, but there wasn't a question, the slide heading wasn't a question. Do you see? So then you had observed that there was parallel structure with questioning. So let's see if there could be a slide. So in this one, you could have had the top heading, e-consulting ethics policy statement. I'm not saying this content, I'm just saying the design. Let's say these were the two sections, then this was a question and that was a question. Or else these were just headings and these, only these were questions. But you wouldn't then have two questions here and one not question. Do you see? On a statement. Otherwise, that would be stylistically not great. So you need to think about it. What will serve your purpose in that slide? But very importantly, if your agenda slide, there must all be questions or none questions for your headings. But internal to a slide, also observe the principle there of parallel structure as well. Tumeleng, did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. So just to make sure that I understand, right? So you're saying, for example, in this particular slide, we could have the heading of the slide there as a question, and then the bullet points under it not to be questions. They would be speaking to the question, and then you have, for example, instead of saying these core values, you could have a question form like what are the core values, and then you have the bullet points kind of like speaking to that as well. But you can't have those questions as bullet points and like mixed it with other statements.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. So let's take this slide. It's a good idea. Instead of having this e-consulting ethics policy statement, you would have the question, what is e-consulting ethics policy statement, or what is in policy statement? And then these would not be questions because these are answering that question. So here, what are the core values would be the question, and these would answer that question. But I said in another scenario, you might have a situation where you actually asking a question because it's a rhetorical question in the sub-bullet points, then all of them must be questions, is what I'm saying. It would just be more stylistically in keeping. So do you understand that?
All right. Thank you. Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good. Great stuff. Okay, so from my side, I'm sure you'll come up with more questions. You're welcome to actually send me an email. I'll give you my details at the end if you have a question that comes up after today. So Selwyn, I'm going to hand over to you and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Billy. So it is now 10 to 5. You know, we've been at this for 40 minutes. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
And let's carry on at 5:02. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. We'll do that.
Okay. We get going, and I have an indication somehow that people are back at their computers.
I see some hands, yes.
Trying to change my view, just bear with me. Bear with me. And can you see my screen with my communications tips? Great. Okay, thanks. Excellent. Right. So I'm going to run through just some general, my general tips, and then we'll go into question 2 in quite a bit more detail. A lot of what I'm going to tell you is kind of what you know about writing exams. You've all been writing exams for long enough. You've obviously done so quite successfully to get where you are. But these are things I try to, that I think are always helpful to be reminded of. But before I forget, I just wanted to, before we move off question 1, I just wanted to make the comment that whilst you've been through a presentation, because that was what was asked in the previous exam set, you know, a lot of those principles apply regardless of the nature of the question you've been given, whether it's a letter, an email, an article, a pamphlet. You know, these are all the questions you can come up with, and those similar principles apply. So don't think that what Billy's telling you is limited to PowerPoint presentations. All right, with that in mind, general exam technique. The first is, no matter what paper you're writing, stay calm. It sounds obvious, but by staying calm, you're probably going to do better than anybody else who's opened up that paper and gone, what the hell am I seeing here? I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't understand this content. And especially when it comes to the communications paper, because in the communications paper, the examiner is going to be picking a topic from anything they want. It might be a healthcare topic and you know nothing about healthcare. It might be a pensions topic. You know nothing about pensions. So just staying calm, literally breathing, taking some deep breaths, thinking, okay, I knew I might get something on a topic I've never seen before, but I can do this. And just, you're already going to be kind of ahead of the game. In terms of getting a topic that you don't know about, and it's not uncommon for that to happen, because the reality is for most of you is, you know, you're potentially just out of varsity, you've only been working for a year or two, you haven't had exposure to lots of different industries, you've only been able to study one or two of the specialist exam areas. And a lot of the stuff you're seeing at first glance might be quite scary and foreign. But the exams are set in, or the questions are written in such a way that if you just take your time and read carefully through the exam, almost everything you need to know is actually in the question, despite yourself not having a deep knowledge of the topic. You know, there's obvious things. Read the question slowly. You see so much evidence of people just not having read the question properly. Read it more than once. Take your time. Get your foundation right, so to give yourself a proper chance to pass. The paper generally has almost all the instructions you need, and when you go through the paper, you'll see I'll point it out to you. But there are instructions in the paper on what you must do and what you mustn't do, and follow those instructions. They're there to help you. They're there to make your answering the question much easier. Sit down and plan your answer. Structure is everything in these questions. Give yourself enough time. Set aside, I'm going to be reading for such amount of time. I'm going to be structuring for this amount of time. I'm going to be writing for this amount of time. I'm going to be checking for this amount of time. And obviously, you know, you've got to be familiar with the applications that you're going to be using, whether it's PowerPoint, Excel, Word. You know, you can't walk into an exam and not be absolutely familiar with how these tools work. You must practice in advance. If there's things you're not sure about, ask your colleagues. Go to Google, all the, you know, to learn how to use a PowerPoint properly, etc., etc. Right, moving on to some technical tips. The first is context. In every single question, you're going to get a description of what's going on. Don't ignore it. So it might be your manager or the managing director of the company has written to you. He needs help preparing a presentation to the board, or he needs to respond. Then you know you're dealing with the managing director, and he's got to write to the board, and you must be able to assume that the board has a certain amount of technical knowledge already. As an alternative, the managing director has asked you to help in writing a letter to a client who wants more information about a product that she bought. Okay, it's a client. You need to start dropping your assumption as to what that client knows from a technical point of view. Right. I think I've said already that almost all the information you need is in the question paper, and you need to play that information back in your answer. A lot of what you've got to do, though, is to work out what's relevant and what's not relevant. I can guarantee you not everything is relevant. You've got to be able to sift it out and work out, based on the instructions you've been given, what fits and what doesn't fit. Generally, the technical markers don't penalize you for giving irrelevant information that wasn't asked for. Where it will hurt you is on the communication side, because it's going to be more difficult to get your message across if you're putting in irrelevant information. Don't be shy to state the obvious. I mean, you can see in that question 1, a lot of stuff, you just had to really pick it up out the question, reorder it, and regurgitate it with a bit of paraphrasing. You might, and you look at this and say, it can't be that simple. Well, actually, it can be that simple. It's just taking what you've been giving and putting it back in a form that makes sense in the context of what you're being asked. Another good tip is to when you see information or when you start writing something down is ask yourself, now so what? So let's say you have an answer or some information. The investment return over the last year is 10%. Okay, that's fact. Now, what do I do with that? Or ask yourself, this means. So this could mean that the investment performance has been very good or very bad. It could mean that it could mean that you made the correct choice or you made the wrong choice. Just ask yourselves those so what questions as you go through the question. And I'll try to find examples of that when we go through the question 2. When you're answering, going through a question, there's always what I call the aha moment. It's like when you go, okay, I got this. I can understand what they're asking me to do. And in question 1, the aha moment was, and it doesn't have to be something very complex, but sometimes it's about identifying, hold on, there's two themes going on here, and I need to deal with these two themes. In question one, it was talking about integrity and ethics on the one hand, and implications for our others on the other hand. And once you had those two themes, you were kind of, everything flowed from there. If you didn't work out that there were two themes being asked about, you would have battled to answer the question. Sometimes there's a trick, not always, and you should be alert to that. Just, you know, is there some irrelevant information in here, for example, or generally it's about irrelevant information that you might go down the wrong path. We have the concept in the exams when we mark of what we call a fatal error. I don't want this to be front of mind, but I do want you to know about it, which is when we're marking, if it's absolutely clear that you haven't got a cooking clue what you're doing, we can see straight away. And despite having been given all the information you require, we can sometimes see that you just don't know what you're doing. I don't know how else to put it. I'll give you examples. You've got context that talks about an investment, and it talks about growth and positive investment returns, and you're asked to illustrate how the positive investment returns show someone that investing over the long term can result in a nice tidy sum when it comes to retirement. And you do your sums, and you show us a negative investment return. But they've told you the returns are positive. But you're telling us, no, the investment returns and things are bad. We'll go, sorry, like red line, done, out of here, don't waste my time. And I'm not telling you that to scare you, but why I'm telling you that is you must always look at your answers and go, does this make sense? Okay, ask yourself that question. Does this result make sense? And you can apply that test in any exam you're writing, not just the communications paper. You'll often have calculations to do, and question 2 is full of calculations. Obviously, if you get those calculations altogether correct, you're well on your way to making it easier for yourself to pass. But if you don't get, if you come out not entirely comfortable with your answer, or you're not sure if it's correct, don't worry. You can pass generally very easily without getting all your calculations correct. Don't get stressed. When you're answering a question, very often candidates don't consider the full range of possibilities that are out there. Let me try to think of an example. You might be answering a question, an insurance-related question, where you're making a proposal to your board about a new product, okay? And you might need to talk about the profits that a company can make by rolling out this new product. And you might have been asked to give an indication of the possible outcomes that can happen. Very often, you might, for example, have some information that gives you an estimate of what the profit might be. Okay, so you say, if we sell such a volume of this product, we can make 20 million rand next year. Okay. Now the 20 million rand is a point estimate. It's only the middle. What candidates very often forget to do is to go, but we can, under the following circumstances, we can make more than this. Okay, and sometimes they get that part right. Well done. And then they forget to go, but if things turn out badly, we can make a lot less or even lose money. So remember to consider the full range of possibilities and not just the point estimate or one side of the equation. Obviously, if your questions told you, only consider, you know, better outcomes, then follow those instructions. But okay, I think I've dealt with the next point. And then the use of charts and tables. So obviously, if you're told, illustrate this with a chart or a table, do so. If you don't do so, you're going to make it really hard for yourself to pass. But generally, tables and charts are very useful to communicate things with. So if you can think of a way to build them into your answer, that's really good. If I go back to Billy's question, you weren't asked to use a table in that final section. It just so happens that that's what the model answer kind of has. From a technical point of view, if you weren't asked, we certainly won't be penalizing you for not doing one, but we will still look for, were you able to communicate the concepts in a way that allows the reader to kind of grasp what needed to be communicated, regardless of whether you did or didn't use a table. Okay, so these are some of the other the tips I want to put across from a communications point of view. Just making it clear again that I'm not a communications marker, I'm a technical marker. Remember, no matter what the nature of the question is, you're telling a story. And you'll remember from when you wrote matric English, every single story has an opening, okay? Some form of introduction. It then has the body, where you deal with the main points. In our case, it's going to be the technical points that you're dealing with. And your story always has a conclusion. You've got to have those three elements, every single answer. And think about carefully what goes into those points. You know, dear Joe, I'm writing to tell you about, to respond to your question about which investment option I should choose in your pension fund. You know, really simple stuff, and it scores you marks every single time. You must also think about your tone that's appropriate for the context. I've spoken about context up front. Know who your audience is. Write down, my audience is, so that you make it a conscious step of getting your tone right. Your tone is important because you'll use a different tone if you're responding to your mother. There'll be a bit more familiarity versus if you're responding to a client or you're responding to a director of the board. More formality, obviously. There's almost always a call for action. In fact, I treat it as there's always a call for action. It's going to be something along the lines of, if you want more information, please contact me on the following telephone number. If you'd like to purchase the product, please click on the following link. Go to the website www. Just some kind of action that you need your audience to take. I've dealt with the next point on PowerPoint. Just in terms of the splits of marks, every question so far is always 100 marks. Half the marks are for technical points, half the marks are for presentations. And you need to try and get points in both halves. You know, you can have a really good technical answer, but if you haven't got the communication elements right, you're probably not going to pass. You need to get something in both halves. let me pause here before I get into the question and check if there's any questions from anybody at this point. No? Okay. Let's continue. So I've got here question 2, which I'm going to presume you've all read. So here you are writing to, there were lots of names here. I kept on getting confused. I actually had it, when I answered this, I actually had to write down, like I got, you know, who's the farmer, who works for the NGO, who am I, who's the worker, and people got this wrong. They actually like addressed the letter to the wrong person sometimes. It tells you who you are, and
Mr. Orchard, yeah.
Yeah, and now you can start seeing the instructions, which I want to actually go through, because it tells you explicitly what you must do. It says, the first one is, you have been asked to work out precisely what the farmer owes Jake. Okay, so now I know. In my answer, I've got to come out with something that says, therefore, the farmer owes you. Okay, and it tells you in kind of in detail how you go about it. Write to Jimmy Orchard. Now, you need to communicate certain things. The amount, you need to say the amount he calculated is not correct. Now, this is where it comes to state the obvious. Dear Mr. Orchard, I need to advise you that the amount you have calculated is not correct, or some similar words. You get marks for saying that. There's a discussion, that's number 1. Number 2 is there's a discussion on compound interest. There's a discussion on why Jake is entitled to the amount that you stipulate. You've got to justify it. You must show, it tells you the components. Well, first of all, it tells you to tabulate. So now we know we need a table. And in that table, you need to show the amount of savings due to Jake, and the debt he owes to Jimmy Orchard, his boss. You need to show who owes what, how the interest is earned, what the final retirement amount should be, and then some other instructions. Copy in Mr. Fortain and include an invitation to meet all parties. That's the call. That's the call to action. Okay. Just to remind you at this stage as well, when you're asked to contact somebody, you must give the full particulars of that person. Don't just say contact Sally. You know, contact Sally Smith on phone number 011 blah 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 blah, or email Sally at whatever. Okay, full contact details. All right. I'm going to now go to the model answer. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the mark sheet. Just see what pops up. And make this a bit bigger. Sorry. Answer the phone, please. Okay. All right. So what you see over here is, let me go back. Sorry, let me rather do something else. Let me go back a step. Let me see if I've got the answers up here. I don't think so. Okay. So you will all have seen the model, the model answer, okay, which is just one version of, let's call it the right answer. As a technical marker, we're looking not for something that matches that exactly, but rather for hitting a whole lot of points that we expect you to be able to mention. Now, what we have is a sheet that looks like this, this is how the kind of things you want to see. So first of all, there is an introduction. And whilst there's no marks, technical marks for the headings, I want to urge you to use headings no matter what you're answering. Because it actually helps you more than it helps me. But it helps you because it helps you structure your answer into sections, and it also helps me when I'm marking, because I know where to look when I'm looking for answers. There's nothing worse for a marker than wading through this. You know, I've got an introduction here and I'm looking for certain points in the introduction section, and there's nothing worse than me like having to jump through your answer to try and work out where's this point and where's that point and where's that, because you'll get the marks if you mention them even though they're in the wrong area. It just makes my life more difficult, and you really don't want to make your marker grumpy. Okay, so as you see over here, there's a mark for context given. You know, I represent Farm Workers Aid, an NGO for farm workers, right? There's a mark for saying, you know, there's marks for saying, why am I writing to you? I'm writing to you about the amount that you will owe Jake when he retires at the end of 2020. And that amount is, you owe him 146,000 Rand. However, you've calculated a different amount, and in this letter I'll be discussing, you know, the correct way to do the calculation, or something along those lines. Then remember, they've told you, you need to explain what compound interest is, okay? And here you see marks for saying that. Compound is monthly interest that you'll earn, and you earn interest on the interest you've already earned. Simple classical definition of compound interest. And you can see there's, like, for saying simple things, you know, there's you get 2 marks, and as you chip away at saying all these necessary things, you slowly, you know, you can start getting, there's 50 technical marks. You know, you can slowly start getting into that range where you're giving yourself a chance of passing. Examples are always a good way to illustrate points, and keep your examples simple. Here is an example of, if you put 50 Rand in month 1, at the end of month 1, this is what it'll be worth. Then you get interest on that again, and this is what it is at the end of month 2. You could have used examples of 1,000 Rand. You could have, you know, you could have used examples of different interest rates. Just the concept was give us an example. Then you get to the retirement fund savings part. Okay, and once again, you know, there's a table in the model answer, but there were different ways of portraying this information, and we're open to different ways. But certainly you know, one of the simplest ways here would have been to work on a calendar year basis, showing what the amount contributed was for the entire calendar year without interest, then showing what it was worth with interest at the end of that year, and then taking it forward all the way up until the end of 2020, excuse me, using the correct interest rate. I think sort of a little trick in this question was to just to be able to work with the change in the interest rates that takes place. And over here, you see there's a mark for that kind of so what part, where you go, you know, here's the amount owed, and this is different to the way you calculated the amount due to Mr. Orchard, and therefore you'll need to pay a higher amount than you anticipated. Okay. Just a comment here on tone as well. My recollection is that there were some answers where people were quite, you could say, a bit bitchy towards the farmer because he didn't do the calculations correctly. That's almost never appropriate. You might need to be clear and in what you're communicating, but nastiness and lecturing, you know, you've tried to cheat the farm, you've tried to cheat Jake out of money. This, you know, we see this in a very serious light, etc., etc. That would have been inappropriate in your response. All right. So now you've calculated the amount due. Then you go onto the loan repayment. Once again, pretty straightforward maths, which you would have been doing probably in Excel. And, you know, state the obvious. The interest rate on the loan is 7.5% per annum, or per annum compounded monthly, equivalent to X amount of interest per month over 5 years. Therefore, Jake owes you 36,000 Rand. Okay, then you've got to bring it all together. The savings are this, and it tells you here. I mean, in black and white in the question, just to come back to it, it says here. You need to write your letter so that both the farmer and Jake will understand precisely who owes what. So you need to say, you owe Jake this, he owes you that, and therefore the net amount that you owe him after deducting the loan is whatever amount. And then don't forget, as per the instruction, give an opportunity to meet all the parties to get together so that you can explain things to them further. Okay, so what you'll see is the technical questions generally come to 40 out of the 50 marks. Okay, we can give additional marks if we think you've done something really smart and nice that adds, that isn't in the model answer. We've got discretion to add marks. We've also got discretion to deduct marks if we think you've done something, sure, that was really quite silly, not quite a fatal error, but something where, no, that's really silly, or too wrong. We can deduct marks, and then there's marks for hitting the technical objectives of the paper, another 10 marks. So in this particular question, we asked the following questions: will the farmer and the worker understand how compound interest is calculated? And you've been told, deal with compound interest. So we'll apply our mind to that. There's marks there. Will they understand how the retirement savings were accumulated? Will we understand how the loan was accumulated? And will they feel comfortable with the final answer given? And I'll give you examples of sometimes people only did the accumulated amount, and then they don't deal with the loan, and then give you an answer, therefore the net amount owed is some number. And we go like, hold on, where does that number come from? We can't see it. So obviously, you know, they could never be comfortable with how the final results came about. Okay, so I'm now going to, you know, Billy's going to make some comments on this question, and then we're going to go over to questions. So Billy, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Selwyn. Yes, I'm sure that people are burning to ask some questions. I'm going to, Selwyn, can you unshare that screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, right. Thank you. So please hold your questions there, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to dovetail the communication with the technical questions, and then you might have some of your questions answered. So question two was what we call an unsolicited letter, right? That means you didn't know Mr. Orchard from a bar of soap, but now you were required to write him. He didn't actually have the query. Somebody else had the query, and actually you are writing on behalf of the workers' union plus Mr. Jake Fortain. So there's this complexity there. Anyway, as usual, we have now 5 areas. We're going to look at your word count. We're going to look at the format. There are word marks awarded for these categories. We're going to again look at planning and structure. And Selwyn mentioned that you do need to spend a lot of time planning and structuring your actual letter or your response. And then, of course, importantly in this question was your language and your tone. It was a very, very important question for tone. How were you going to open up this conversation? And then, as with the technical markers, there are 10 marks, sorry, for overall impression. And here they are. We have that too. Okay, so on close inspection, let us look at the word count and the format. Now, the word count was very generous, and you knew you could actually insert a table because of that, because every number is counted as a word actually in the table, and you need to count that too. So don't nest it as an image, rather just put it in as a table. All right, so just quickly make sure that this is correct, right? Your letterhead, this gives you all the details you need to have. Don't make up a letterhead, use this. Details must be believable, all right? It's Mr. Jimmy Orchard, where is he? A lot of people placed him not on a farm. Well, it's also possible that he has a box number somewhere, but also it wasn't in the Western Cape and so on. So you need to pick up those nuances. It makes a difference to the communication markers. The date is in full because it's a letter, formal. There's a space in each case after all of these details. After that, there's a space. Then there's a space there. And here, 2 spaces. And of course, that is actually in single spacing. Right, we look at this as well in the format mark that you've got a subject heading. Although in planning and structure, we'd be very interested just to know what you've said for that heading. So it's marked once from the point of view of format, but it is also your creativity is important for later on for the overall. And then of course in the closing, your closing greeting, yours sincerely, not with a capital S, okay? Signature is often used with angled brackets on either side, okay? But this is also acceptable because it looks like it's Alex's name. I would have just put Alex Kutsia there. And the copy is at the bottom of the letter. Some people didn't know how to put in copy because they don't receive letters. So nowadays, so they used what they knew, which is from email, and they put a CC and they put it at the top of the letter. It's not meant to be there. So if you had the acted notes, that would have and you followed those, then you would have known where to put it. So it's at the end of the letter, 2 places below at least your designation, and then after that you put your word count. So it's just 1 C though over there. Okay, so let's have a look. someone mentioned about planning and structure, and I've mentioned it again, and now I'm mentioning it again. At a macro level, you ask yourself, what are the sections for this correspondence or this document? And here we had 5 sections. Always you have the opening, which provides the context, sets the scene, and paves the way. It signals where you're going to go in this correspondence. Okay, very important that you put that in there. And very important from the communication perspective. You can't just jump in. This is someone you don't know. You would never meet someone in the street you don't know and just start speaking, right? You would say, hi, I am, right? And that's what you needed to do. And then there were these 3 areas that you needed to address. How more efficient than to actually take these 3 areas and create headings out of them. And then, of course, your close. So at a macro level, there is a framework for you. You can hang all your details off that. A micro level, we want to see that paragraph and sentence structure. So that is also important, but that will come into your language and tone. So let's have a quick look. If you look at the letter, there are 3 pages of the letter. If you look at the letter, you can see there is the subject heading. Compound interest is right there, their retirement savings and your loan repayment. But now, as well as the conclusion, which, by the way, before I forget, this is what we call an orphan heading. You don't want to do that. If you're working in Word, put in a page break or otherwise, enter twice, so that this conclusion appears on the next page alongside its relevant paragraph. Okay, so have a look here. You'll see that at a glance, the person who's reading the letter can actually pick up where they need to be. So if at first I'm going to read the letter, I'm looking at this letter, I'm a little bit astounded, okay, because I'm Mr. Orchard, right? And but I can immediately see, okay, there are sections here, and then I can go back to it. I didn't quite understand compound interest, then I can go back to it. Okay, so let's move on to planning and structure 3. Okay, the 3rd in the series. And now you need to draw the threads together. This should have conclusion at the top of it. Okay, you draw the threads together and reach out or point the way ahead. As someone says, you will always need to do that. Do never just abruptly close with yours sincerely. If you have any further questions, and in this particular question, you needed to have the offer of joining for a conversation afterwards if they need to just clear anything up. Note that all the details are then reiterated. So it was difficult, this question. From a communication perspective, we as lay people would like to see consistency with your argument, consistency with how you portray, how you explain something, consistency with the way in which you calculated both the loan, the private loan back from Mr. Orchard, and also the retirement, so that they made sense. And often these 2, there were different ways in which they calculated, candidates calculated those 2 amounts. And also, before I forget, the example that was given, in fact, I do speak about it in the next point, so not to worry about there. But the reiteration here is very important. And it was surprising with this exam how many people got these very wrong. Usually the loan repayment was calculated correctly, but sometimes this became a lot more than 186,000. And from the communication perspective, we looked at it and we thought, okay, if it was consistent in the delivery and it was a few thousand out, it was okay. But you would have been penalized on the technical side. So we move on to language and tone, and the 2 are difficult to separate, planning and structure from language and tone, because look at the opening. You must have your opening, which is part of your structure, right? But at the micro level here, these are the words you've chosen. I represent Farm Workers Aid, an NGO. Just simply, it's hard to start such a letter, but try and start it simply. Imagine yourself talking to the person, and then what did you say when you spoke to them? Just write that down. So how do you put these together? The whole context is provided. Okay, I'm writing to you right up front to clarify the expectations around the payment due to Jake Fortain, right? And as I will explain, so you go telling the reader what to expect, okay? And you've told them what the amount will be, the net amount in the beginning, which is so, so useful. Because at the end, I mean, you're going to show how that comes about, and at the end, you're going to say it again. So instead of saying that they are wrong, you can say that they are correct actually in the fact that they got simple interest right. There was something right. You need to have something to warm to the client so the client will listen to you. If you're accusatory in tone, then you've closed down the conversation. And this conversation is not over yet. In fact, I want to entreat you to look at that in any question that you have to do, any correspondence. Ask yourself, what would the follow-up conversation be? If you don't, if there's not going to be a follow-up conversation that is comfortable, then you've got something wrong. So if you were accusatory, how were you intending to pick up the pieces afterwards? It would have been very difficult. Okay. So words of affirmation when you can, you are correct. Okay. And no blame, no sarcasm, as was pointed out by Selwyn already. And Selwyn also said the headings are very important. And as you can see, we also say that that's important. Now the use of figures and notation. How much notation can you use? Well, if Mr. Orchard thought that simple interest was enough, then you need to be very basic, because you also need to explain how this is going to come about. I love these questions from the point of view that I'm going to learn, because I'm a layperson and I don't know like that how compound interest is calculated. I know what it is, yes, but I don't know how it's calculated. And I have to go back to the textbook each time if I need to calculate it. So this is what is good for me as the communication marker. I can see this. Notice also the percentage points, not more than 2 decimal places. Okay, now this was inferred, the 0.67%, because it was 6% and then it's 0.67%, and you're going to show how that came about. So you can't leave Mr. Orchard for too long on this 0.67%, right? Because you must show it here, which is what they did. So these are complex concepts, simply put, but then explained again. So this first explanation is very important. It sets the foundation for the table. I prefer, as a layperson, that you use data that's given rather than create additional data. Although if you took an example of 1,000 Rand, it would be fine as well. But for as a layperson, or as if I was Mr. Orchard, it's nice because I can see exactly this from the third paragraph. If we consider, right, and we get to an amount, I can see it in the table. It's in the first row of the table, and then I feel at ease. So that's great. Notice that there's also a reference to the agreement. From the communication perspective, if you do not reference what the history is and it's pertinent, in any event, it's useful for you from a negotiating point of view, because you need to have some backing to say why you're actually doing this and why it would be necessary for you to change the way you're calculating that. So the agreement that you and Jake had, referring to that history. Okay, it's vital. So the closing. Your closing is always another opportunity to set the record straight, and also in this case you had to mention that you could meet to discuss it further. And some people even made this a more formal way of doing it. So see all that you do actually as an opportunity. See it as an opportunity to have this conversation. So Selwyn, I'm done there, but I'm sure there are going to be questions. I'm sure there must be questions. I just quickly want to show you, yeah. I want to go back to the table quickly and show you that each of these, right, these dates is a word count, right? It's one word there, and as well as all of these words. And notice that here the figure, the Rand figure is snug on the actual amount, so that you can use it for the spacing here for the thousands. I think that's the most efficient way to do it, to avoid using too much word count. But we did not penalize people for going over the word count if it was as a result of the table. It needed to be, there was a balance there. Okay. So that was mostly the communications perspective, but I just want to reiterate, I should say, that your audience is very, very important. Here, your tone needed to be consistent throughout. Sometimes you get lucky with a question and it's the top and tail where the tone is measured mostly, and inside you don't need to refer again to the person. But here you needed to maintain the relationship throughout the correspondence. So you need to remember that, because the tendency for somebody who's very technically minded is to really get into the technical detail and make it very clear, precise, and so precise that it's almost clinical and cold, and then it erodes on the tone. And then by the time you get to the close, you've forgotten that you're in the clinical mode or the technically correct mode, and you don't end off with some warmth. So guard against that. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to leave it to you to ask us some questions. Any questions? Oh, you do have. Okay, great. Taryn, let's go with you. You have a question.
Hi. Firstly, thanks so much, Billy and Selwyn. I have two questions regarding the question 2. I just noticed in the sort of model answer that at the very beginning, in terms of format, the Mr. J. Orchard and then his address, there wasn't a line in between the two. And I was wondering if it would have been incorrect to put a line between, like a space between them.
Yes, we don't have a space between them. The name comes with the address. So we put it snugly together.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then the other thing was that I noticed you had a heading for the conclusion. So I used headings throughout sort of for, compound interest and the loan amount and stuff like that. I was wondering if it was necessary to do a heading for the conclusion every time.
It depends. Sometimes you can end off by saying in conclusion or in summary or in closing, in which case you wouldn't need it, particularly if you don't have the word count. So, you don't have to have it there. I just think that it sometimes does give a nice rounding off, but it doesn't have to be there. If your closing paragraph is clearly a conclusion, there's no need to put a heading there.
Awesome, thanks. And then just
want to add, we need to see when you're finished dealing with the point and starting a new theme.
Okay.
There's many ways to.
Cool, thank you. And then one last is just for a question like this, would you recommend doing the table and the calculations in Excel and then copying it into Word?
Yes.
Okay.
I would. Selwyn?
What's the alternative?
I tried to do a table in Word and then I didn't finish.
No.
Okay, no, definitely. That's probably, definitely. Sorry you did that, Tara. No, definitely work in Excel. Be comfortable with your calculations in Excel. Really.
Awesome.
I think that is the answer there. And also, so in a question like this, it may be useful for you to get that calculation out of the way almost earlier on. So there are other questions as well. I see. Thank you very much, Taryn.
Thank you so much.
We have Dania again and Itumeleng. Dania?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Billy and Selwyn. Really do value this. My first question is with regards to the percentages used throughout the question. So there's the 8% and then the 6%, but then also in the question, Jimmy states that he added 10%, which he believes he owes Jake an amount, which let's just say X for now. So I just got confused between those two interest rates when calculating the final amount, just so that I could tie back and say, when I calculated it at 10%, that's why it was incorrect to your amounts. But obviously not in that tone, but I just wanted to understand the difference of those two interest rates, or three actually.
So, Selwyn, do you want to take that? What I wanted from a communication point of view, I thought it was really quite good when people mentioned that his calculation was simple interest, and it was simply 10%. It was simple interest plus an additional 10%. And so you didn't have to go down there completely, because remember, you've got to watch your word count. So the most important thing was to actually state that that's how he calculated, and that's how it came, he reached that amount, but not to go into it into a lot of detail, because you already needed to show that he hadn't used compound interest, and if you used compound interest, this is how it would be. This is how the answer would be. So it was provided to you because he thought he was giving Jake an extra bonus on that, but meanwhile it wasn't. And some candidates, forgive me for saying it that way, but for some candidates, I was astounded because they really laid into Mr. Orchard with thinking that this was going to be such a boon. And the tone there was really quite accusatory. So that's a pitfall, really. You've got to watch for that. So there were two things there: not to dwell on it too much, but to acknowledge it. Maybe not do a whole calculation and say this is where you were wrong, because you're really illustrating. You needed to, showing the compound interest and also do the table.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say the same, just very quickly. The 10% was like a red herring for you. It was practically irrelevant to the scenario. The main point was that the original calculation was incorrect, and then you spent time on you should rather focus your attention on the correct calculation. And if you do that, then the 10% becomes irrelevant or not.
Okay. Okay.
So the really important thing is to distinguish when you're busy reading your question. You need to write down exactly what the important points that you need to play back. And if there's anything that worries you that you feel I should have put this in, you would check against the examiner's notes, and you would only put them in if they had word count for it as well, and if it served your purpose. So your purpose was already fulfilled in this instance. Did you have another question, Dan?
Yes, I just had one other one, but thank you so very much for touching on that. The last question is kind of just, I struggled actually with the calculations in this question. So is there a possibility that we can get access to like a Excel spreadsheet just to kind of verify our calculations? Because I just don't understand where exactly I went wrong in the spreadsheet that I did.
I can offer you a very good YouTube one on the compound interest story as something to help out there. I'll send it to everybody the link.
Okay, perfect. I think that'll help.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of a more direct solution. I mean, I don't know what the policy is of the Actuarial Society in terms of releasing the spreadsheet. We can ask them to if they can just, because I'm presuming your issue is your issue around how to do the calculations in Excel, or you know how to use Excel, but you just couldn't get back to the same answers.
Yes, so it would be the latter. So I do know how to use Excel, but it's just, for instance, like looking at the sample solution, it seemed like they were working on a month-to-month basis, whereas I just had annual. So I couldn't get for instance, even the simple 622,5, because I was working on the total 600 rand. So
I mean, this isn't an Excel issue, but I'll say to you, what you've got to do is you've got to take the rand amount each month and accumulate it at the monthly interest rate. So you've got to take your annual interest rate and convert it to a monthly interest rate. First part.
Okay.
Then you've got to calculate that, and then you do that for each year. Because there's monthly, there's 12 payments for each year. So you just say for 2000, you do, for the year 2000, you do your 12 payments, sort of a future value for 1 year. Then you take now you've got the value at the end of 2000. Now you've got to compound that at the annual rate to get to the end of 2020. So it's another 19 years you've got to add compound interest on. Then you start with the year 2001. Monthly interest rate for the year, compound that, what's it, 75 Rand a month. But if you have a go, if you don't come right, you can contact us and we'll ask the Actuarial Society if they can release that spreadsheet out.
Okay, thank you. I'll definitely give it another go. And if I do, fall short, I'll contact you. Thank you.
But I think I'm going to say this. If you're battling with kind of the question, then it's telling me that, I'm not worried about the question that's come in the past. It's the next question that you got to worry about, because you're not going to get the same question again. There's a more fundamental question about how you do, about your understanding of compound interest, because all the instructions on here are adequate to get to the right answer. There's nothing in here that there's no additional information you would have needed. So have another go. You're welcome to contact me and I can talk you through it again and we'll get the spreadsheet.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dania. Okay, so I'm going to give Itumeleng a chance and then Darren, and I see that we have 5 minutes. So Itumeleng, would you like to go? Tell us, what is your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Selwyn and Billy. So I just have a few questions. So the first question that I have was, with the letter, when it comes to the structure right in the beginning, I noticed there, Billy, that you used a company letterhead. And I was under the impression that here, the actuary is actually acting in his own capacity without representing any specific company, because we are not told that he's a junior actuary of this firm or of this company. And so my understanding is he would use his own address in that personal capacity. Wouldn't that be the case?
We accepted both, because he was writing in his personal capacity, but the letterhead there, it could have not been company, it could have been the NGO's letterhead. I think that if you are working for an NGO, even on a pro bono basis, and you had to contact somebody else, you'd probably represent yourself through that letterhead. So we were not hard and fast about that, because it was a context and there was a choice involved. He could have chosen to be with his, write it from his company's address, but that wasn't as appropriate as his own, and also as an NGO. So we gave leeway there. Okay. So it wasn't explicit, you see. So there was choice involved. Yeah. When it's explicit, it's different. Sorry. Yes.
Yes. No. I was just gonna ask, like, as a rule of thumb. So do we then assume that if we are not told that you are actually working for this firm, but you are writing something, do we then assume from there that you are writing your own personal capacity, unless you are associated with some organization like a firm or an NGO in this case?
You would generally be told that you're working for in your personal capacity. It will be evident in the question that you're working for a company. It will be evident. This was unusual in the sense that the person was an actuary, but it was a pro bono thing. They were doing it because they were giving back, so to speak. So you are given that information. So when I've not come across a situation where it hasn't been clear. It's always clear if you are, what capacity you're working for, if you're at a consultancy, if you are a senior consultant, if you're a junior consultant, those types of things. You have to pick up, though, sometimes, depending on the sort of weight of the content, that you would maybe be more of a leaning towards a senior personnel rather than a junior, because of what you've got to say. And then you had some other questions, you said.
Yes, yes. So the other question that I had was like with regards to the word count. You mentioned there on the table that we would count, like for example, those years on the side of the table. So now my question is then, does it include all the contents of the table as well, or what? Like, do we only count the heading of the columns and the rows, and that's it?
Everything. So if you were to take your cursor in Word over that table, you would get a word count from it, and that's what we would count. If you nested it as an image, then yeah, we would count and then maybe go across the rows and just multiply by how many rows and how many you'd have. I mean, it's very difficult to count every single word there, but so that's why I say do it in Excel and then cut and paste, but paste it, and there's an option for you to paste it that the word count will be visible. So yes, we count all of that. Ordinarily speaking, we don't ask you to present a table that large. So you can present your information in a table, which, as Selwyn has suggested, is actually a good thing, particularly if you're having to explain something, or there's some comparisons or past trends versus current trends, etc. These are important things. Then you could put them in a table. But that table, you do need to, if there are figures in there, they count as words.
And so, like, could we then say by extension that if you had a graph as opposed to a table,
yes,
would the axis numbers count as well?
Yes, unfortunately.
Sure. Okay. And then the other question that I had was what Selwyn mentioned about negative marking. Like, that got me worried a little bit. Could he provide maybe like some examples where we actually have marks deducted because of a silly thing that one could do, just to get an understanding of what is going to cost the marks, as opposed to a forgivable mistake of maybe not getting the calculations right, for example?
Here's an interesting one. So we've had questions in the past where, so before I continue, I know we're kind of out of time, but I'm happy to continue for a bit still. I'd rather deal with the questions. So don't stress anybody about if you haven't asked your question.
Okay, thanks, Selwyn.
So we've had questions in the past that deal with interest rates and the change in the value of a bond, for example. If interest rates change. So let's say, for example, if interest rates go up, the value of your bond goes down. And some people might say, well, if interest rates go up, the value of your bond goes up, which is wrong. Then you say, no, that's, and then you'd have to draw conclusions from that. You know, you then say, because it comes to so what, and then you, so you get lost all along the way. We'd possibly, you know, take some marks off for that kind of thing. Generally, it's for something that should be really obvious. If you're looking at a different example, let's say someone has debt. It's a similar point. You know, you've been given a question that says you can take a loan from the bank. You've got two options. Option one is to fix your interest rate at the outset for the term of the loan, or you can have a loan where the interest rate varies as the prime rate changes. And you'll be asked to comment on changes in the interest rate. And you'll say to us, you'll say, well, if interest rates go up, then the loan repayment on your fixed rate loan will go up. I mean, like, that's like a fail. I mean, it's just so you can't go anywhere after that. But also it depends on whether that element of the question is core to the question. If that section, where you're getting it wrong, is kind of on the fringes of the main points to make, it doesn't make a difference. But if it's core to the question, then, and you almost can't proceed having made that error, that's a fatal error. But I want to, what I want to stress is, I always wonder whether I should tell candidates about the concept of a fatal error, and I tell them because it's just from a point of transparency. But you've almost got to cast it aside and go, there are so many mistakes I can make, and it makes no difference. I'm going to just continue doing this question as I see fit, and do my best. That must be your state of mind.
So when I just want to add that you should all know that these questions aren't constructed with a fatal error in mind. They are constructed so that certainly not at the outset is it apparent that there would be a fatal error. It's not with that intention at all. So usually those are the people, those that set the exams try and avoid that. And secondly, you did see that marking sheet that Selwyn showed, and it's not so much negative marking, is that if there are 3 points awarded for a comment, for a definition or for something, then the marker can decide whether to give you the full 3 points or maybe 1.5. So that's in addition to what Selwyn was saying. If it's a bad enough situation, a reflection on your knowledge and your communication of it, then you would get a negative impression, therefore, and you would get marks taken off. It's not negative marking per se. It's not the negative marking that you may be used to with set calculations. So I just want to clarify
more context. I mean, if I go through all the papers that I mark in terms of fatal errors, I might have one a year, across all the candidates that I see, that you might have, it's very infrequent that you're forced to do that. In terms of negative marks, it's like a mark here or there that you might take away. Literally a mark here or there. 2 marks, 3 marks is a push. Generally, you don't need to give. Generally, people will fail themselves, if I can put it that way, by just not getting enough marks, as opposed to negative marks. It's not. But Billy's exactly right. We don't. It's not like you would have passed, but we find reasons to put negative marks in to fail you. I mean, that's not the case. If you're unable to answer, you generally, if you can't grapple with the question, you're just not going to get enough marks anyway without any negative marking.
But in terms of the technical marks, you saw how detailed that mark sheet was, and that's another reason I'm sure why Selwyn put it up, is that you can look at that question paper and you should ask yourself, you need to play it back, remember, and you need to play the detail back. So there's certain things that were given in the notes that you actually need to give back as well, even though you might have assumed, oh, that's only for me to know. So you need to just develop a sense of alertness about that. Okay, so Darren, luckily it's not your own physical arm, because it would have been very sore by now holding it up there for so long. You have a question for us or two, I'm not sure.
Yes, thanks, Billy, and thanks, Selwyn, as well, for the great session. My apologies for the broken camera, unfortunately. I have 2 questions, but I'll keep them short, Billy. So if you can go back to the table for the retirement savings, please, in your presentation.
Right, okay. Here we go.
Yes. Yes. So if you look at, we can take the last figure, for example, the 183,000, the total. Would that figure be counted as 2 words due to the space?
Yes.
Or would it 2 words? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second question would be, say for instance, you do this calculation for the savings, and halfway through you possibly make an error, for example, with the interest. But from there on, your calculations are accurate, and the final answer that you get is still in line with what it was supposed to be, and you explain it, you explain it in line with the answer that you got, and it does make sense. How would the penalization work? Would you be penalized for the first mistake, or would it carry through as you go through the answer?
Selwyn, you want to answer from a technical point of view?
The first is you're not going to be penalized for the mistakes.
Okay.
Unless they're of such a nature that they clearly show that you didn't have a clue what you were doing. So let's say in this table here, I think there were two interest rates, say,
yes, there were the 6 and the 8 or something.
6 and 8. And let's say you got them confused. You did the 8 and the 6.
Sorry, 5. Sorry, 5.
5, I can't remember. The 5 and 8, for example. Let's say, and you got them the other way around. You did the 8 and the 5. Your answer is going to be wrong. So you won't score marks for saying, you know, the amount owed is 183,000 Rand, because you would have written a different number, but you won't penalize you for getting the calculation wrong. That's not going to happen. You know, you're going to have to go a lot worse before you get penalized. You just won't score the mark. And then for any component that's correct, you'll get the right mark. The question then comes is, let's say now let's say you've worked out that the farmer owes 150,000 Rand, incorrect, and the farm worker owes 50,000 Rand, incorrect, and the net amount is in your view 100,000 Rand. Based on your numbers, it's correct. At that point, we'll have the flexibility to say, even though you got the bottom two numbers, the top two numbers wrong, the net number is still kind of correct because you kind of did the netting off correctly. So you can score marks later on, even though you'll find some of your earlier calculations are wrong. It depends on the context of the exact question that's being asked.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just while I'm here, I forgot to mention, I did speak about notation. I just want to point out this this 2, this superscript here, 2. So normally speaking, we would not have accepted this on J equal OU at the bottom of there on slide 20, and this 60 superscript there, but on its own. But because the foundation was laid there, it's acceptable, and it's clear that this is OR, right? And so it can be used there from a communication point of view. Okay, please do watch that you are always careful about what notation you use. Darren, you had another question?
No, those were the only two. Thank you.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay,
Just,
another
just,
question. Go for
yes,
it.
just a small one. Just a small one. So, on the subject line, there, I see it's not high, it's not underlined. Neither is it at the center. Is that like? Is this another way of doing it, or?
This is the way of doing it. Good question, Itumeleng. So it was some time ago, I think, that you started doing this communication exam, and now you've come back to it, and maybe it was business practice then to have everything center. It's normally on this left justified here, so it's not underlined. It's we steer clear of underlining. It's a very good point that you make, because underlining generally means that there is a link, a hyperlink. Also, there's no point in underlining and being bold. What has happened here, you do see a hierarchy working, because that's in plain, whoopsie, sorry, I keep on thinking on the real thing here. That's the heading, the subject heading, and these paragraph headings are in italics, but they're also in bold. So another level would have been italics only. So that is showing you that that's the most important heading, and then that one is secondary to it. So definitely not an underline and a bold. Also, it's a double importance, and we don't do that. It's important enough just to be bold. The same with capital letters. You would never do capital letters and underline, for example. So yeah, that's how we do it, and it's business writing, basically. So that's definitely on the left. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thanks, Itumeleng. Darren, you had another question, or you? Okay.
No, there's still the old hand, Billy.
Okay. All right. Let me just see now. Selwyn, if everybody has completed their
Yeah, I
their
think then we're done.
questioning, would
Wish
you?
everybody luck.
We can close, but I mean, I just also want to let you know that you can still write to me, and I'll follow up for you. And if it's a technical question, I'll send it on to Selwyn, and then I will send all of you the link that I promised Dania on compound interest. You know, if you're not working with it all the time, we can sometimes forget, right? You might actually be surprised that the simple stuff is the one that trips you up. And the more you're expecting more complex calculations in the exam, and then you don't get them. And so you overcomplicate it for yourself in a way. So yeah, one does need to go back to the drawing board about the more basic things, technical things, you know, concepts and so on, I would say. Okay.
Well, thanks everybody for taking the time out. I hope it helps you along. And Billy, thank you.
Thank you, Selwyn. I really appreciate it. I always learn something. I always learn something. That's why I keep on teaching the subject. I haven't finished learning about it.
Good. All right. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.